This video covers the creation of a recipe workbook and the entering of a recipe into that workbook. As you can see in this drop-down list, I have created a number of recipe workbooks. But in this case, I want to put a recipe into a new workbook because I'm copying some recipes from a Portuguese cookbook I picked up while I was living in that country several years ago. So I'm going to just enter a name I want to use for this recipe book, Portuguese. And when I click New, the program says we're going to change the name to Recipe Portuguese. The program uses those the first 6 characters of the workbook to identify recipe workbooks so that they can be included in the drop-down list. So, okay, I'll accept that. And now I've got a workbook by the name of Recipe Portuguese. And now also the Recipe Create/Edit tab is visible on the form. And I click on that and it calls up the recipe form so I can start to enter a new recipe into this workbook, which of course is blank, so there are no recipes in the drop-down list for the title. So I will enter the name of the recipe I want to add, polvo guisado. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is polvo is octopus in red wine. I'll also go down and set the target meal and the category to seafood. I do this to provide a filter for when I've got a lot of recipes in this one workbook, that I can then use that filter to identify them fairly easily. From the cookbook, I'm told this is good for 4 servings, so I'll set the serving count. And then I will also click on proportions cannot scale down, since this involves a whole octopus, and it's pretty difficult to buy half an octopus. The servings is used by the program to create eventually the provision list based on the ingredients that I'm going to add. So if I were to put this menu into put this recipe in a menu where I had, say, 6 crew members on board, it would expand the proportions for 6 people rather than 4, and that would go into the provision list. Provision list is not complete, so that's not important so much, but if you provide the documentation now, then it'll work when I finally have that working. So now I'm ready to add the recipe. Click the Add Recipe, and now that recipe, at least by name and categories, has been added to the Portuguese recipe workbook. So I still don't have anything in the recipe. So the first thing would be to create an ingredients list. Pulling that form into visibility. Oh, the first thing I want to add is octopus. Now you can see it's there. If I didn't have octopus, I could just type it. It's also maybe a good idea a lot of times to type it, because the program will fill it in for you and you avoid typos. If I misspelled octopus, the program's going to add whatever I said it was to the list of shellfish items. So we'll go with octopus, one of them, 1 each. Medium size and cleaned. The comment section are things you can just save. They are specific to a recipe. And I add that ingredient, and now it shows up down in the ingredients list. Let's add one more. Going up the alcohol category, I want some red wine. I want 3 cups. And I add that ingredient. Now I've added most of the ingredients to this recipe. I have got one more. I'll go now, select sauces, and massa de pimentão, which is a Portuguese pepper sauce, probably chipotle and adobe sauce Might be a substitute in this case. But in any case, I just need 1 tablespoon, and I add that ingredient, and now my ingredients list is complete. So I can close that out. Next, I'll start to add the recipe instructions. I do that by just starting to type in the instructions for step text box. So the first thing to do is to rinse the octopus, dry, and cut into small pieces. Put the oil into the pan over medium-high heat. Add onion and garlic. Pan. Saute until translucent. Add octopus pieces. Cover and reduce heat to a low simmer. That's the first step. I click the add step, and now that's added. As you can see, I have 1 step in. If I wanted to go back and edit, it's in a drop-down list. I can call it up again. And now I have added a total of 4 recipe steps, and I have 1 more final recipe step to add. And I'm done. Now that recipe is basically complete. If I wanted to, I could add some galley equipment to the recipe. Again, this is another dynamic list that's created as I identify galley equipment that I may need. So I'll just use a 3-quart saute pan for that. I add it, and the recipe is complete. I can now go to the print page. Having selected print recipes, select the recipe, the Portuguese recipe book I just created. I either print all of them, but since there's only 1, I'll just specify that and print it out. And here it is in Excel print preview form. So that's how you create a workbook, a recipe workbook, and enter a recipe into that workbook.